Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on human rights, corruption, and trust in a new social contract. My name is Daniel Wolvén, and I'm the Swedish ambassador designate to the Republic of Korea. I'm so happy to join you here. We have an exciting panel today, and we have a number of prominent guests and panelists. So I hope that the audience will enjoy and stay with us for these 2 hours. This event is co-hosted by the Embassy of Sweden in Seoul and the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law as part of the annual World Human Rights Cities Forum in Gwangju. And let me start by saying how pleased I am that the World Human Rights Cities Forum is still happening despite the global challenges posed by COVID-19. All of us would have wanted to meet, of course, in real life, but that said, this virtual format also allows us to have participation for all over the world, which open even more possibilities for interaction. Let me begin by saying just a few words about today's topic. Typically, the strongest democracies have the lowest levels of corruption, and corruption declines when democratic institutions work together with the people to hold officials accountable. Today, we're going to explore and clarify the links between anti-corruption efforts, transparency, democracy, and human rights. And we will also look at how trust plays into this equation. In this session, we will discuss these linkages, explore different ways to counter corruption, and also highlight local governments' role in promoting democracy and strengthening human rights. We'll also learn more about how cities work with these issues in South Korea, Indonesia, and in Sweden. As you saw in the introductory video, a key reason for this embassy's decision to co-host today's session is the Swedish government's drive for democracy. The drive for democracy aims to provide support to the institutions, processes, and defenders of democracy, while also responding to the growing threats and challenges facing democracy today. The Swedish government's drive for democracy stems from a conviction that we all have a duty to raise awareness that democracy is in decline in the world today and to mobilize support for the fundamental principles of democracy. As a part of this drive, Sweden co-organizes democracy talks with partners all over the world. We have a full program ahead of us with the discussions divided into 2 sessions. The first session aims to give us an introduction to the connection between corruption, human rights, and trust, and to give us an overview of the global trends. In the second session, we will hear mayors sharing their experiences from working on transparency and against corruption. After each session, we will have time for discussions with questions from the audience. In this regard, it will also be my duty as your moderator to make sure that the times are kept so that everyone gets the possibility to both to present, but also for our audience to ask and have their questions answered. Before we start, I would like to inform our audience that it's possible to ask questions via Zoom Messenger. Questions to the panelists can already be posted, and I will then select the questions that will be asked to our panelists. To make the session more interesting and interactive, I would also like to encourage our audience to engage with us. So please start thinking about your questions already now. Without any further ado, I would also like to introduce my co-host, Morten Kjærum, our first speaker. Morten is the director of the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, who is also a co-organizer of this entire forum. Morten will also listen in on all the panels and provide us with a concluding reflection and analysis at the end of the session. Please, Morten Kjærum, would I invite you to say a few words before we introduce the panelists?
Thank you very much, Daniel. And I too would like to echo that I'm very pleased with the collaboration with the Swedish Embassy on this key topic. When we look around and where we work on human rights issues, we time and again come to the conclusion that the single most important barrier for realizing human rights is very often corruption. Why we have also decided in the planning organization of the World Human Rights City Forum to make this panel on corruption a permanent feature of the World Human Rights City Forum, of course, addressing the issue from various aspects. So I look very much forward to a long collaboration with the Swedish Embassy on this issue, which is so crucial. But hopefully we will see changes. Hopefully we'll see that corruption is less prevalent than before, and hopefully we will get a lot of good inspiration from this discussion today. So with that, I look forward to the discussion and all the good ideas coming up.
Thank you so much, Morten. Let me now introduce our first speaker, Ms. Helena Olsson, who's the Senior Program Officer and Coordinator of the Raoul Wallenberg Institute Working Group on Human Rights and Local Governments. Helena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And it's really a pleasure to be on this panel in this discussion and with the very eminent speakers that we have joining also in this panel today. So I wanted to start just by repeating one of the aims of this session today. It says that we will present why and how human rights and anti-corruption both are cornerstones and mutually reinforcing in achieving a social contract, and also why this is true also locally. So if we start with the first part, why and how are human rights and anti-corruption cornerstones to this new social contract? Well, first, as we all know, corruption affects the trust between citizens and state because it distorts the rule of law, it diverts funds that should be used for the benefit of the marginalized, the sick, the elderly, and so forth. It also makes access to healthcare, water, employment, good education, the possibility to run for public office, to get a fair trial, and so on, a matter of money or contacts rather than of equal rights. So countering corruption is central because corruption erodes the social contract. And then human rights is central because improving human rights arguably has the opposite effect. So why and how are these two then mutually reinforcing? Well, over the last few years, the Raoul Wallenberg Institute has organized a roundtable where, for instance, Mr. Ayamdo, who is also a panelist here, was one of the experts participating. We have also organized workshops and research about this nexus between human rights and corruption. We have involved in this quite a wide range of stakeholders, from local and central governments, from the corporate sector, from academia, and so on. And from we've had both specialists from the human rights side and from on anti-corruption. So based on these activities, we have concluded that the human rights system and a human rights-based approach can add much value to the fight against corruption. And we also concluded that the two systems in many ways can be mutually reinforcing. And we did that, for instance, based on example cases that have been shared by participants in these events, and on examples of how human rights mechanisms have helped address corruption at different levels. Just to exemplify this type of synergies that could happen between the systems, strengthening the protection of rights such as freedom of expression and association, or of human rights defenders, could make it safer for journalists and whistleblowers to speak up on corruption issues. Likewise, setting up mechanisms for transparent and accountability on public spending and budget priorities can both lessen the risk of corruption and it can also increase trust. We also thought that using human rights law can be useful as an additional source of arguments in corruption cases by adding the human rights focus on victims and on the people who are affected by corruption. That could possibly help mitigate impunity. So in 2020, we decided that it was time to bring this nexus issue to the fantastic forum and the experts that participate in the World Human Rights Cities Forum to help us concretize and understand better the dynamics around these issues. We also thought that the potential of connecting issues could be even better discussed at the local level, because the dialogue between rights holders of human rights and duty bearers can be closer, and effects can also then be more direct and concrete. So together with the Swedish Embassy in Seoul, we organized the first session on this topic last year. We there heard very convincing examples from mayors who were speaking of how funds that have been regained through anti-corruption measures were redirected to improving the protection of women victims of violence, of improving access to water, to safe public spaces, and so forth. We also heard actually from the mayor of Hwaseong, who we have the pleasure of having with us also this year in this panel, who related how steps to open up the dialogue and increase the participation of citizens in local governance led to a steep increase in the city's transparency ratings. And another mayor also shared how she set up mechanisms for safe reporting on corruption and also community dialogue forums to improve the trust and the accountability with citizens. So all in all, both panelists and participants in last year's discussion at the World Human Rights Cities Forum seem to agree quite strongly that with the conclusions that we had drawn in our earlier events, and also agreed that we need to talk more about this and what it means and could mean. So this is an opportunity for that. Will certainly not be the last one, or we will not solve all the challenges pending here, but I look very, very much forward to hearing the reflections, the experiences, and hopefully maybe some recommendations also from the other panelists and from participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helena, and interesting also to hear your reflections on last year's forum and the testimonies that you underlined from the mayors. We will have that the same information or similar information, I think, later on in today's session. Could I just pick up on one point from your presentation? You speak about on a larger level how these human rights problems clearly are caused by corruption, and how human rights mechanisms should be activated to help combat corruption. Could you say more about, maybe not the causal link between the two, but in which way maybe you see how concretely we can use these human rights mechanisms that are at our disposal to even better help combat corruption?
Yes, well, I think more concrete examples will also come from the other panelists, but I think one of the added values is that seeing the connection between these themes sort of shifts the focus from the crime itself to the victims and to the wider social impacts of corruption. We need to look at both, but looking at both and connecting them also brings in new tools that can be used to counter corruption and hopefully then to avoid impunity. I think the human rights system has a very elaborate structure of binding treaties, of standards, and also monitoring bodies from the international to the regional to the national and sometimes also local levels. There are periodic publicly available state reports and expert reviews where also civil society can give input. There are state-to-state reviews and of how states parties monitor they implement these treaties. And there is also a very large global active civil society community. So all of this can be built on to strengthen the accountability and transparency also in countering corruption. I would also like to take the opportunity of Mr. Ayamdo's presence in this panel to point to the importance of national human rights institutions. So national human rights institutions are the closest available human rights mechanism for that is very, very accessible in the countries where there is an NHRI, accessible for local governments to engage with in these and other issues. There are also practically all aspects and effects of corruption have some form of reference in the human rights treaties, the rule of law, economic rights, etc. And several of the treaty bodies have received complaints, and also special rapporteurs have received complaints and cases that have been submitted to them that relate to corruption and have made statements and included these issues in their reports and so on. So it's, I think there are many tools that can help to shed light and help to counter impunity of corruption.
Great. Thank you so much, Helena. And this marks the perfect transition, I think, to our next speaker, who is Mr. Martin Mulwa, an economist working at the UN Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, with a focus on Eastern and Southern Africa in the joint program between the Raoul Wallenberg Institute and WHRCF on rights economy. So I will leave the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm quite pleased to be part of this very important conversation. So, as you rightly mentioned, I work within the Eastern and Southern African region, and I'm hoping that I'll bring some perspective in terms of the work that we have done around corruption and social spending. Really looking forward to this particular conversation. So, allow me to just start off by just giving some overview of the work of the Surge Economist, what is the objective of the Surge Economist, and how we do operate. So the work of the Surge Economist is basically trying to connect human rights with macroeconomic analysis and policies with the objective of realizing economic and social rights and the attainment of sustainable development goals. So over the past, we have worked and looked at issues of how debt, budgets, corruption, and have either restricted or expanded the fiscal space to provide for social spending. Of course, with a special attention in terms of discrimination, looking at issues of inequality and ensuring no one is left behind. So with that in mind, allow me to just first share some data on corruption. So estimates from the World Economic Forum have actually shown that the global cost of corruption is equivalent to 5% of the global output, which is equivalent to $2.6 trillion US. Further to that, IMF have done some estimations, and they show that countries do lose, globally, countries lose a total of $1 trillion US in terms of revenues. And these numbers do not capture the full loss from illicit and from illicit financial flows. The situation is more damaging in Africa, where the African Development Bank have actually done some estimate and showed that the continent loses around 148 billion to corruption every year. So the value of corruption, when you contrast it with some social spending sectors, is that the value of corruption far exceeds the annual investment required to reach universal access to clean water by the year 2030, which is estimated at 39 billion per year. So, colleagues, what I'm trying to paint is that corruption as macroeconomic impacts on a country, and IMF have actually spoken to it and have actually identified corruption as a macro-critical issue, in a sense that corruption has the potential to affect or affects macroeconomic stability. From a human rights perspective and from also an economic perspective, that corruption does reduce fiscal space and limits the ability of governments to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights in a more sustainable manner. I want to highlight 3 points in terms of how corruption does affect human rights from an economic perspective. So first is that corruption prevents low and middle income countries, especially the least developed countries, from mobilizing public resources for economic and social rights, and also that in itself constrains the SDG target number 17.1, which calls for strengthening of domestic resource mobilization. Second is that, and I think this is echoes what Helen had said, corruption diverts funds from the state budgets and crowds out spending in public services such as healthcare, social protection, and education, which are essential for the realization of human rights in general, and also specifically economic and social rights, and also attainment of specific sustainable development goals. Third is that the potential loss of public funds from corruption and aggravate public debt, which in itself again affects social spending and affects the ability of countries to provide the minimum essential levels. So since corruption does reduce fiscal space, people living in poverty, the vulnerable, the marginalized are the most affected, since they are most reliant on public goods, and they lack alternative for private services, especially such as healthcare. So what we have seen from the experience within the African context is that due to the compensate for the revenue shortfall as a result of corruption, most developing countries might be inclined to introduce regressive taxes, such as consumption tax or other forms of indirect tax, which also disproportionately affect the poor and the lower income countries. So in conclusion, I think the economic and social cost of corruption are quite clear. Corruption not only robs the tax system, but also its very own legitimacy. So redressing corruption can make a vital difference, first by enlarging the fiscal space and domestic resources available for the realization of human rights, especially the economic and social rights. Budget becomes a very critical aspect. It is one of the most important economic policy documents for the government in terms of provision of public goods, but also in terms of the realization of human rights. So and I would look forward to more conversation around human rights budgeting that is actually linked to issues of fiscal transparency and public accountability in terms of ensuring that the limited funds are actually being used to help those who are in need. So the adequate fiscal space that could be realized by addressing issues of corruption and potentially contribute to the minimum core obligation and progressive realization of economic and social rights. And addressing corruption also serves as to strengthen trust and the social contract, and also in terms of building back better. I'll stop here for now and look forward to more engagement during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this very interesting. I think it's particularly interesting to hear an economist also talk about these issues. And maybe just a quick question. You in your introduction, you actually put a price on corruption. This is how much it costs. Or this is the economic damage that it does to our countries and societies. Do you feel that where you are working on this, do you feel that this is gaining traction? Because of course, economic growth is an important issue to all governments, and certainly to all populations. Do you feel that this is an argument that is slowly gaining traction, that in order to have sustainable economic growth, we also need to get rid of corruption?
Yeah, it's getting traction, and the fact that what we do see especially within developing countries and low and middle income countries, is the limited fiscal space, and with the COVID situation, that requires government to respond very quickly in terms of addressing the needs of the marginalized. Corruption becomes a critical aspect, and I think more importantly within the developing countries is how do you also strengthen the institution that can hold the government to account in terms of ensuring that the limited money that is available it's now being used for its intended purpose. So yeah, I think it's taking traction, and I think it is important even within the economic fraternity we start estimating the cost of corruption even at country level, so that we get a more contextualized numbers.
Great. Many thanks. And with that, we shall move ahead to our next speaker, Mr. Charles Ayamdo, who is the Director of Anti-Corruption at the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice of Ghana. The floor is yours.
First of all, let me express my appreciation to the Raoul Wallenberg Institute and your good self, the facilitator for the occasion to be part of. It is always interesting and very grateful that the commission that is doing work around this area to show the evidence on the ground will be part of it. So starting straight away, I'll start from the viewpoint that though there is some awareness of the benefits of applying the human rights-based approach to deal with corruption, there is little evidence on the ground. And so with this presentation, I would like to show how the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, with a three-man or triple mandate, is doing on all of that. As you may be aware, it's a commission that is a national human rights institution of Ghana. It is the Ombudsman of Ghana, and it's an anti-corruption agency. Okay, I was saying that the commission is in a unique position to apply the human rights-based approach in its work, because it has a unique position. Can I continue?
Yeah,
okay.
Please.
Right on. Okay. Because it is in a unique position as a three-in-one institution to apply the human rights-based approach. Next slide. So I was saying the setup of the commission as a three-in-one institution has an added advantage of providing a one-stop shop center for addressing citizen complaints bordering on two or all of its mandate areas. That is human rights, admin justice, and anti-corruption. So quite often, the commission is called upon to address allegations of corruption which contain human rights abuses and administrative injustice. Similarly, some human rights complaints that come before the in them. Next. Next. Right. So unlike, so in some jurisdictions where you have multiple institutions, when you have a complaint which has all those three elements, human rights and corruption and admin justice, you will have three or more institutions handling those complaints. And as experience has shown, corruption and human rights, sometimes the differences are not clear. The boundary lines are not clear. And so you are likely to have turf wars and others amongst the institutions. Now, let me take a look at the corruption overview in Ghana. As you all know, it is a serious problem for Ghana as it is in other countries. And the CPI of Transparency International shows that from 1999, when Ghana joined the survey, Ghana is yet to obtain the mark of 50, which is, I say, is a pass mark. The highest was in 2014 when we got 48, and then we slided downwards, and we have been scoring less than 45 since then. Next. Right. And so what are the causes? Some of them that I have listed and very relevant for this discussion is the lack of awareness of the nexus between human rights and corruption, which was clearly brought out in the 10-year action plan against corruption. Added to that is limited commitment to the values of integrity and poor management practices in public organizations. and then lack of effective corruption reporting systems, institutional weaknesses, and outright impunity, among others. Next. Then, therefore, it's not surprising that trust in some institutions in the country is fast fading. Level of engagement of citizens with duty bearers are low, and the willingness of women to hold political office in Ghana below expectation. So out of some survey was conducted in 2016 on the level of trust of citizens on 6 institutions. And the highest score was on our National Peace Council that had 64%, followed by SRAJ, our own institutions like our Electoral Commission and the law courts placed third, scoring only 57% and 53% respectively. Then district assemblies, local authorities had a trust level of below 50, that is 42%. Next. Next. Now, therefore, we had to adopt this action plan in 2014 with an emphasis on intensifying awareness about the link between corruption and human rights, because the lack of it has been shown to be a cause of corruption in Ghana, while addressing issues of values, ethics, and culture in the services. Next. Next. Right. And so the commission is coordinating now. So I will go to the investigations. One of the areas that we are demonstrating this nexus. And so respect for human rights is a cornerstone of our investigation procedure. We do not have powers of arrest. We don't detain persons under investigation, even though we have powers to restrict and enforce somebody, compel somebody to come before us for investigations. When we decide to investigate any person suspected of corruption, we inform the person and to provide the person time, usually about 10 to 10 days, to respond to the allegations in writing. And so the person has his or her freedom, yet he has to respond to our investigations or requests. And so the person has the opportunity to prepare his or her defense. Can we go forward? Next. Right. Next. And the person may be represented by a lawyer. And so I have selected a few significant decisions to show this linkage, because there are several of them, but time permits, and I would not be able to discuss all of them. And I think Raoul Wallenberg Institute already know this first case, which I discussed at Sumi and Tema General Hospital. This is a case where a doctor was late to duty while a pregnant woman was waiting in labor. By the time that the doctor came, the one who was supposed to take over from that doctor who was off duty also was late for office. By the time they came, it was too late. So both the woman in labor and the baby died. And so the husband came to us, and we found that the hospital was negligent, and they disregarded the right to life of the woman and the unborn baby. And it was the first case that we had to award some compensation for this woman. Definitely the hospital was not pleased with our decision, and we went up to the High Court, and the High Court supported us by just slashing 0.5% of the fine, that the compensation that we ordered for. And The other case that I also have shared also before, discrimination, which is a value and principle in both human rights and corruption, and the right to work. This was a person who suffered sexual harassment at the workplace and was finally dismissed from the work. And the fellow came to us, and as usual, we found that the discrimination violated the rights of the complainant, including the right to work. That also, as usual, was challenged in the courts, and the court argued that it was a discrimination, that it was a violation of the fundamental human rights of the lady. And so this case is the first in Ghana to have gone to the court. So it is a classical case that serves as a reference point for lawyers and for people interested in the area of sexual harassment. The unauthorized levies on parents. Some schools, public schools, charge some unauthorized fees, which they claim usually are voluntary, but they are not voluntary. And so we have had a few cases where parents have come to us alleging abuse of office of the school authorities. And as you know, this is something that impacts on the right to education, especially on poor parents who hardly can afford any pay. Right? Next. Next. Right. Another area that we use is the public, creating public awareness or public education. And the National Action Plan that I talked about, I referred to, recognizes issues between human rights and corruption, and things that showed that it's cause of corruption in Ghana. And when you take the NACAP, this is how it's quoted, that the fight against corruption will bear little fruit without the awareness of public officials and the general public on dangers of corruption and the duty of every citizen to control corruption. The education must foster a broader societal appreciation of the causes, costs, and ramifications of corruption and its linkage to the erosion of human rights. And so the Commission is leading in this aspect. Next.
Mr. Ayamdo, I'm being a little bit mindful of the time. Okay. And I would like, since we have an audience who would like to ask questions, if I could respectfully ask you to wrap up, and we can jump straight into the question and answer session and pick up some of the remarks that you made in this presentation.
No problem.
If that's agreeable to you.
No problem. So in addition to the investigations that I have talked about, there are other measures that we have instituted, such as raising awareness, and lots of programs have taken place. Much of it are in local authorities and so on. And so the NACAP brings us, the Commission and local authorities together, because they have a mandate to implement the action plan, and the Commission, being the coordinating institution, is always available for local authorities. Therefore, we think, and the past participation of the Commission in these initiatives, which first presenter mentioned, we have participated in the roundtables and expert meetings on this nexus. And at the 8th session of the Conference of State Parties, we again tried to raise awareness and create alliances on this very topic, and in collaboration with the human rights, the Right to Development section of the Human Rights Commissioner's Office in Geneva. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for your interesting presentation. And with that, we'll jump into the discussion. And maybe I'll start off with a question from the audience, which concerns whether the panelists have had experiences with the trade union movement and organized labor in the fight against corruption. And maybe I will start by turning to you then, Mr. Molva, given your experience as an economist. Is this something that you've encountered? Certainly from Scandinavian countries, we have a large historical experience with labor movements playing a positive role in the development of our societies, and perhaps also in the fight against corruption. So I'll give this first question to you.
Well, that's a very interesting question, and well, I think based on the experience here in Africa, that we could see that trade unionists are trying. I think I was reading, I'm not quite sure, one country in the Western Africa, the trade union were actually calling out government on corruption issues. I think it would be interesting to see trade unions play a critical part in that area, but I'm not quite, I mean, I do see as something that would be growing, moving forward in terms of holding government to account. But yeah.
Thank you very much. I would also pick up on another question, and this one will be for you, Helena Olsson. The Raoul Wallenberg Institute also offers capacity development on human rights to local governments, and this is also to tie in a little bit to the presentation just made by Mr. Ayamdo on building national institutions, building national capacity in the fight against corruption. And I would want to ask you if you could give some examples of what kind of advice that you are able to, and what kind of support maybe that you are able to provide to local governments in this particular line of work.
Well, when it comes specifically, I mean, when we started around 5 years ago, a little bit more, to work more in a targeted way with local governments and to offer capacity development on human rights specifically to local governments. And so far what we have, it has looked a bit different depending on the context, what topics that we focus on. But generally, we start very broadly. I mean, local governments, depending on the degree of decentralization, what areas are delegated to them and so on, have many different and varying responsibilities for human rights. But we generally have broad advice on, we introduce the human rights system and sometimes stress the role of local governments as the duty bearer of human rights. And corruption sometimes features as a factor in discussions, and sometimes it is also explicitly on the agenda, but we have not done so much concretely directly with local governments. What we generally would do, I think depending on who is in the room, so if we have local government officials that work more on the anti-corruption side, we would point to the connections and try to point them in the direction of the human rights mechanisms and what they could do with those. And if the people we talk with are working more in the social areas or with human rights specifically, we would try to connect them to anti-corruption specialists. And of course, we try to bring them together to talk to each other and to understand each other better. I think maybe Mr. Ayamdo would have more concrete examples. What we are often or always asked for in our trainings are more concrete examples. So I think the examples that Mr. Ayamdo and others are listing here, like what measures can be taken, have been taken, what has worked, what hasn't worked. That's something that is important as a complement to what we do. I mean, we teach what human rights law says, basically, but to add more concrete examples.
And I wanted to turn to Mr. Amyando next, also to pick up a little bit on the very interesting concrete examples you offered of court cases and such. And I wanted to ask you, you're a representative of a National Human Rights Commission that, if I understand it correctly, also has an anti-corruption mandate. And I wonder, when you receive complaints or have issues brought to you, do they both include human rights violations and corruption? And I would also like to ask you to what extent you see that those are not only interlinked, but maybe sort of intermingled, that there are cases brought to you where you see a very clear connection between these two, the violation of human rights and corruption. It would be very interesting if you could dig a little bit deeper into that, as you started already in your presentation.
The complaints do come, and the fellow writes that addressing to the Commission that the fellow's rights have been violated. They will indicate what rights are there. Then they indicate about corruption. Sometimes they add admin justice. But we have a system. When we receive such complaints, we go into an initial assessment session, and then we determine which of the three mandate areas is more glaring. Because, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the boundaries are not clear. They are blurred. And because the mandate that is more predominant, but we don't leave out the other aspects. That was just for administrative purposes. So we know that this case can be handled by under the human rights mandate or the anti-corruption mandate or the administrative justice mandate. But we will have to handle both, all the allegations that are in there. And these are common occurrences.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one last question from our audience, and I will not point at anyone, but I will, the person, you can decide yourself if this is something you want to answer. I think it's really interesting. And it's a question about, has modern technology made it easier or more difficult to identify corruption? I don't know who wants to take a stab at this. I think we've all seen films circulating on YouTube, and we've all seen leaks in media implicating high-level officials. Who would like to answer that question? Please raise your hand.
Maybe I can give you one example. Can I go ahead?
Okay, sure.
Right.
Go ahead.
As to the use of ICT, I'll give you one concrete example that a number of apps have been developed for reporting corruption in, say, the Ghana Police Service. And this app, it's very user-friendly, and car owners, commercial vehicles who ply the roads have it. So when you come across demand for bribes, you quickly send a WhatsApp message to that number at the police service and you'll be attended to. So I think that ICT has helped deal with and identify corrupt actors in the country. There are several other instances that are being rolled out in the country to help identify corrupt conduct in the system. Have you heard me?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Right.
I don't know. We have 3 minutes left, if I'm correct, of this session. So I will not take any more questions. But I maybe, Martin, if do you want to say something as a concluding remark, either Martin or Morten, on this particular issue of technology and corruption? Has it made it, and also obviously on human rights, has it made it easier for for local citizens to document and bring their complaints to the government. You will have the last word on this.
Was it me or Martin?
Martin,
Okay.
sorry.
No, I mean, it's quite interesting. I think also it's part of it also relates to the public being physical transparency and accountability. For instance, if budgets are being posted online and the citizens' budgets are being available, then clearly from a citizen's perspective, we can see if the money was meant to build a road and it's not building. We can call out such instances, and I think that's the role technology does offer. Not necessarily most advanced, even the low inputs like social media could play a very critical role if citizens are actually empowered and can actually read the budget and sort of shame or not necessarily shame, but put the government to account in terms of when they do see the budget allocation are not being used for the intended purposes. But I think it's an interesting question. It's something that is constantly evolving, and no doubt digital technology will play a big role in terms of addressing issues of corruption.
Great. Thank you very much. And by that, we will conclude this first session. And if I understand the schedule right, we will see again our Drive for Democracy video, and then we'll go straight to our session with the invited mayors. Thank you very much. Thank you, and welcome back to the second session of this webinar on human rights, corruption and trust in a new social contract. We have just listened to a very compelling session on the link between human rights, democracy and anti-corruption, and we will now move to perhaps even more practical part of our session, where we will learn how cities in South Korea, Indonesia and Sweden have worked on these issues. And as ambassador designate to the Republic of Korea, I am so pleased to introduce our first speaker, Mayor So Chul-moo of Hwaesong in South Korea. Hwaesong has worked to encourage citizens to actively participate in local issues. It has established integrity policies based on citizens' opinions in its strive to improve human rights. And as a result, this year, Hwaesong won the Presidential Award, the highest honor, at the Sustainable Development Awards of Korea by the Ministry of Environment and Local Sustainability Alliance of Korea. The floor is yours, Mayor So Chul-moo.
안녕하세요. 대한민국 화성시 시장 서철모입니다. 작년에 이어 올해도 세계인권포럼 도시포럼 인권정책회의에 초대해 주신 다니엘 볼벤 주한스웨덴 신임대사님과 모르텐샤이름 라울발렌베리인권연구소장님, 패널로 참가해 주신 각국의 지방정부 시장님들과 전문가님들께 깊은 환영의 인사를 드립니다. 지난달 UN 총회 2차 SDG 모멘트에서 문재인 대통령님께서 개회 연설을 하셨습니다. 대통령님께서는 건강, 환경, 평등 등 인권의 보편적인 문제 해결을 위한 지속가능 발전은 공동의 실천으로 이뤄낼 수 있으며 대한민국 또한 이에 적극적으로 기여하겠다는 의지를 밝히셨습니다. 지속가능 발전을 위해서는 무엇보다 국제적 협력과 각국 중앙정부의 실천 의지가 가장 중요합니다. 포괄적이고 거시적인 목표를 제시하는 중앙정부의 역할뿐만 아니라 시민들과 소통하며 세부 목표를 수립하여 실행하는 지방정부의 역할 또한 매우 중요합니다. 현재 화성시는 누구도 배제하지 않는다는 유엔의 지속가능 발전 목표의 지역 특성을 반영하여 4대 전략, 17개 목표로 구성된 화성시 지속가능 발전 목표를 수립하여 이에 따른 구체적인 전략과 사업을 추진하고 있습니다. 화성시는 시민과 함께한 지속가능 발전 목표 생태계 구축을 위한 노력을 인정받아 환경부와 전국 지속가능 발전 협의회가 주관한 제23회 대한민국 지속가능 발전 대상의 최고의 영예인 대통령상을 수상하였습니다. 이렇게 좋은 성과를 얻을 수 있게 된 이유는 시민의 참여와 신뢰, 공공기관의 청렴을 중점에 두고 추진했기 때문입니다. 부패한 행정은 시민들로부터 신뢰받을 수 없으며 신뢰받지 못한 행정기관에서 아무리 좋은 정책과 사업을 펴도 결국 시민들로부터 외면을 받게 됩니다. 따라서 정책을 시행하기에 앞서 가장 중요한 것은 조직 내 청렴 문화를 정착시키는 것입니다. 청렴 분위기 조성을 위해서는 간부 공직자가 솔선수범해야 합니다. 화성시는 간부 공직자를 대상으로 부당지시 근절 서약을 실시하고 있습니다. 또한 부서별 청렴활동 지표를 개발하여 부서장이 주관하여 추진하고 포상금 등 인센티브 제도를 도입하였습니다. 청렴활동에 대한 동기부여와 공직자의 부패 행위에 대해서 인정과 관용 없이 엄격하게 조치함으로써 책임을 분명히 하고 있습니다. 다음으로 시민의 참여기회 확대에 중점을 두고 추진하고 있습니다. 시장은 시민으로부터 위임받은 권한을 돌려주어야 한다는 생각으로 이를 위해 시민이 행정에 참여할 수 있도록 하였습니다. 화성시는 2018년부터 자발적으로 참여한 4천여 명의 시민들이 지역 현황과 발전 방향을 논의하고 지역회의를 개최하였습니다. 2020년부터는 600여 명의 청소년들이 지역 문제를 논의하는 청소년 지역회의도 개최하고 있습니다. 화성시는 새롭게 코로나19의 언택트 시대에 맞는 시민의 의견 수렴 방식인 온라인 정책자문단을 도입하였습니다. 상시적으로 온라인 설문을 통해 시의 중요한 정책과 현안에 대해 시민의 의견을 묻고 시민이 직접 정책을 결정하는 구조로 현재 3만 명의 시민이 참여하고 있습니다. 시민이 지역 문제에 자발적으로 참여하면서 시민의 역할이 확대되고 조사 결과를 투명하게 공개하여 정책에 반영함으로써 행정에 대한 신뢰도가 점점 향상되고 있습니다. 이와 같은 청년문화 정착을 위해 행정 내부의 자정 노력과 시민의 정책 참여가 행정의 신뢰로 이어지면서 화성시 지속가능 발전 목표 추진은 대한민국 지속가능 발전 대상 대통령상이라는 결과를 가져왔습니다. 제가 시장으로 취임한 지 3년이 조금 지난 지금 한국 매니페스토 실천본부가 주최한 전국 기초단체장 매니페스토 우수사례 경진대회에서 2019년 지역회의로 최우수상을 수상했고 2020년 무상교통으로 우수상에 이어 올해 화성형 그린 뉴딜로 최우수상까지 3년 연속 수상하게 되었습니다. 지역회의, 무상교통, 화성형 그린 뉴딜 모두 시민들의 참여와 신뢰가 없었다면 추진하기 어려운 정책들입니다. 조직 내부적으로 인센티브와 통제를 통한 청년문화 정착과 동시에 조직 외부적으로는 시민의 참여를 통한 행정에 대한 청렴도 향상되어 시민들이 행정을 신뢰함으로써 부패 방지와 인권을 위한 정책이 효과적으로 실현되고 있습니다. 지금도 시민들이 참여할 수 있는 분위기를 넓히기 위해 계속 고민하고 있으며 앞으로도 화성시는 시민의 참여, 조직 내 청년 문화를 바탕으로 추진된 정책이 시민의 권리를 보장하고 더 나아가 인권의 가치가 구현될 수 있도록 더욱 노력하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's so interesting to hear you speak about the importance of participation and trust from citizens, also the feedback that you have received from these 30,000 civic participants, and all the important work that you're doing as a mayor. I wanted to ask you also to pick up on that, and especially the question of trust, which is so important and which we have talked about here as a stronger, the importance of trust for a stronger social contract. And I wanted to ask you a little bit if you agree with what was stated here in the concept note for this session, that human rights and counter corruption are both cornerstones and mutually reinforcing in achieving a stronger social contract and in achieving trust. If you could comment a little bit of that, I would very much appreciate that.
네, 그 신뢰와 부패는 매우 화성의 사례를 봤을 때 긴밀합니다. 왜냐하면 부패가 진행되기 위해서는 시민들이 참여하지 않게 하는 방법이 매우 중요합니다. 신뢰가 시민으로부터 나오고 시민이 건전한 감시 시스템을 구축한다면 신뢰와 부패가 어떠한 관계에 있는지를 이해할 수 있습니다. 시민들이 신뢰함으로써 시민들이 행정에서 이루어지는 문제들에 대해서 이야기를 할 수 있고, 그 이야기가 지속된다면 시민들의 참여가 부패를 끊고 신뢰로 가는 길이라고 생각합니다. 그래서 행정에서는 부패를 끊는 첫 번째 고리로 신뢰가 가장 우선되고, 그 신뢰로 해서는 시민들의 참여가 무엇보다도 중요하다, 이렇게 생각합니다.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With that, we will now move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Haja Ana Muawana, who is the regent of Bojonegoro in Indonesia. And your government has worked actively with human rights work for many years, focusing, among other things, on open and transparent governance. Bojonegoro has also been praised for its integrated work on human rights, including civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. The floor is yours.
Thank you for my time. Please share this. I want to presentation about a few slides. Yeah, okay. Okay. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. Bojonegoro, we are 2,300 kilometers square and 28 sub-districts and 419 villages and 11 sub-districts and total population about 1.3 million. Next. So next. Okay. All of the population, I have the program for scholarship program. This is between age and the workforce. Totally is 57 57%. And the population is more male than female. This is male and this is a female. This is more than male. Next, please. Next slide. Okay. Potret of Bojonegoro, forestry, agriculture, settlement, and industry. Next. Okay. My vision in the 5 years, making Bojonegoro a center of people, economic and local socio-culture for the realization of a faithful, prosperous, and competitive society. Next, please. Next. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Sustainable development strategy, number 1, optimizing public service, innovation carried out of the district governance as one of the important elements of the governance pillar. Number 2, good governance in maximizing regional economic potential. Number 3, implementation of open and sustainable development. Next. Regional performance, we are growth economy before this is pandemic COVID. I'm just minus 1.09. Another region is many minus. It is when pandemic COVID. Next, please. The depth of severity poverty. This is more than lakh. Example, 2019, we are 1.72, and now it is a 1.35. This is more good intervention is my programs. The poverty rate in the 22 was 12.87. It is what impact from the COVID, but the depth of severity of poverty index in 2020 more lakh than before. Next, please. This is development index villages in the Bojonegoro. My target is the 2022. This more growth villages, only 2 type development and independent villages. I want to many intervention program for in the villages. But life in the this is IDP. My IDP is slowly, but Bojonegoro is far away from the city. But I want to improve from push up development from the villages. Next, please. Competitive regional in Indonesia, Bojonegoro it supports 20% oil and gas. This is we have two gas and oil, and also this is for the farmers supply water, and Bojonegoro also 189 kilometer about river side in the Bojonegoro. Next, please. Okay. Next. Okay. Basic right fulfillment program. We have education and health, like the scholarship program, and 100 of health insurance coverage and health facility service. Number 2, this is economic sector. This is like the support for farmers and the support from the traders. Number 3, fulfillment of basic service, uninhabitable houses, and number 2, hygienic latrines and infrastructure. Number 4, marginal community program and women and children program. Next. This is example. We have a supporting scholarship. Is it 3 type? One is a science scholarship, and number 2 is scholarship. Even 2 scholarship one villages. Sorry, this is from Indonesian. I have not changed this before. Yeah, sorry. So final project scholarship, student of state and private universities in the local, and for poor families and farmer for card holder. This is for support the index human development for long time future. Next, please. Like I'm saying before, 100 people in the Bojonegoro covering health service. We have 3 regional governments and 36 accredited health center. Next, please. Next. Okay. This is example. This is example construction of inhabitable houses. I'm planning 2022 is finally all the people have houses. I'm preparing to allocation budget about 6,000 unit from 2 houses for people. Also, I'm completed hygienic. This year is final, and we built 2019 120 kilometers routes, and 2020 built 121 kilometer route, and this building now the recent is 189 kilometers. Also, Bojonegoro, I built like the bridge Bojonegoro between Blora and Bojonegoro and Tuban. This is different regions, but I'm support the Nightboard region, but Bojonegoro is take it margin from this the bridge. Next, please. This is example. I have a construction of 6 child care center of sub-district. We built close from the industry area to some kids put in the car center, child center. Also, we have like the regional food aids, and number 2 condolences funds, and number 3 social assistance of the disabled, and number 4 social assistance for perhaps and abandoned children, number 5 assistance for the chronically, and number 6 child welfare institution assistance, and number 7 assistance for abandoned children of orphanage. Number 8, food package from the poor and disaster victim. Number 9, economic program for poor and families, like example, like I'm saying before. Number 10, food for elderly program. This is I take from the Friday, even Friday, I put from the like people poor in the some area, like this sample the picture. Next, please. One of my achievements, Bojonegoro just finals one data in one data portal as a management of the government's commitment for equal access to information development. It is maybe only few region in Indonesia release from the big data. Bojonegoro, one of the region in Indonesia. Next, please. It is my vaccination now totally 37.6. I must obstacle for the past. I hope this year support from the central government, the final to vaccine is my people. Also, from the COVID-19 management, we are effort establishment of the task force from the district to villages. And number 2, budget refocusing and reallocation, and the provision of COVID-19 treatment service at district hospital, provision and convalescent plasma donor, PCR testing, and vaccination. This is all item. It is for free from the victim of COVID-19. Next, please. Okay, this is one of my achievement. This is one of villages in Bojonegoro. The name is Kedung Sumber, in the top 10 village implementation for public information transparency. Next. One more, this is most innovation region and the Innovation Government Award 2020 and 20. Next, please. Also, universal health coverage, 100% population is covered healthcare. Next, please. Okay, this last one. Last one, this is a child-friendly district at intermediate level and gender equality award in main level. This is last this month. Next, please. Last. Thank you so much. Sorry, my English is not fluent, but I to try to presentation with English. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this very comprehensive presentation and of your region. Thank you, Madam Regent. In the interest of time, I think we will jump straight from Indonesia to Sweden, and I will give the floor to Mayor Helena Stenberg, who comes from Piteå. And just to say something about Piteå, in 2020, Piteå declared itself a human rights city, and that this means that the city will work actively and strategically with issues that are fundamental to human rights. And I think you are currently developing a long-term plan also to increase knowledge about human rights in all the municipalities' activities. So I'll give you the floor to you, Mayor Helena Stenberg.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunities to speak at this session. I'm very proud and a little bit nervous. I will tell you about our municipality's work to become a human rights city. But first, Piteå is a municipality in the northern part of Sweden. We have 42,000 inhabitants, and this year we are celebrating our 400-year anniversary. Piteå is one of two cities in Sweden that calls ourselves human rights cities. The other one is the city of Lund in the southern part of Sweden. Of course, all our 290 municipalities have human rights on their agenda, but we have decided to call ourselves a human rights city, and of course, it has obligations. The process for our efforts to make Piteå a human rights city has its starting point in this overall goal: Piteå, a city with a community characterized by its diversity, decided by the City Council. This is one of 3 prioritized goals, and all of our departments have a responsibility to work to achieve this goal. We usually say that our work to become a human rights city has been a journey. Sometimes a smooth and easy journey, sometimes a long and winding road. This journey started from 2009, when the City Council decided to prioritize the goal, to a comprehensive citizens' dialogue, to organize and lead the work by guidelines and courses for staff and politicians, to internal and external campaigns, and finally to the announcement that Piteå can call itself a human rights city in 2020. I will also add that it has been important for us to cooperate with other municipalities, and we also have had support from the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions all through this journey. Now this is in Swedish, but I would like to share some hands-on examples of our work. This is an example of one of our external campaigns. It's a poster campaign that we sent out both digital and in classical paper posters all over the municipality and the city. The posters have facts about different cases of discrimination, and we ask the citizens what they can do to change this. One poster, for example, says, in Piteå, there is 3 times more girls than boys that have mentally problems. What can you do about that? Another example is a poster that says, ethnicity, this was difficult, is a common cause of discrimination. What can you do about that? We wanted with this poster campaign to affect people and to start a process to think about this discrimination and, of course, to take responsibility to change it. We have also worked with companies, associations, and organizations who want to certify their activities as human rights city friendly. And we have certified industrial companies, hotels, sport associations, our museum, music festivals, and many more. And we have, when we do this certification, we have had we have made it in public areas such as the festival, in meetings with our local companies and so on, because we think it's very important to show each other the work that has been done in all those companies, associations, and organizations. We have worked near our citizens throughout this process, and I think that that is crucial to be successful and to make sure that we can see progress in those questions in a sustainable structure. And I'm really proud of the engagement we have seen for our goal to become a human rights city. And then I mean just of course, in our own organization, but the most important with the citizens, the companies, associations, and organizations, their engagement is, I am very proud of that. And I think that is one of the cornerstones to make this sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mayer. And we will now move into the discussion with the panelists. And can I just introduce it by saying, to me as part of the audience, it's inspiring and fascinating to see how 3 such different cities, Piteå, Kaesong, and of course Bojonegoro, to hear you share experiences from how you have handled certain issues and certain problems in your municipalities. And I would maybe like to start with that question that I would pose to all 3 of you, starting with Mayor So of Kaesong. What lessons do you think these other 2 mayors or cities can learn from your experience and achievements. And I will start with you, and then I will move on to the Regent of Boyo-Negoro, and then I will finish with you, Mayor Helena Stenberg, with the same question. What, having heard each other, what are the main lessons that you think the other cities could learn from you in this particular context, and also with regard to issues regarding human rights and corruption?
Sorry, this is Bojonegoro first or Korean first?
I had invited the mayor from Korea first.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
우선 그 보조네그로 시장님께서 말씀하시면서 그 빈곤이 매우 심한데도 불구하고 인구도 130만이라는 큰 도심에도 불구하고 그걸 하기 위해서 하는 게 매우 좀 의미가 깊었고요. 또한 마지막에 아동 친화 도시로 가려고 한다는 것에 대해서 되게 의미가 깊었습니다. 화성시도 그 현재 아동 친화 도시로 인증받는 도시인데 그 어떻게 하고 있는지를 좀 제가 듣는다면 우리 화성시한테 좀 많이 도움이 될 것 같고요. 그 스웨덴 헬레나 시장님께서는 너무 스웨덴이 워낙 또 인권적인 도시임에도 불구하고 두 개의 도시가 인권 도시를 선언했다라는 거는 우리 그 아직까지 그런 인권에서 좀 뒤처져 있는 나라 측에서 봤을 때는 매우 의미가 깊다고 생각합니다. 그리고 그거를 시의회랑 해서 하나하나 차곡차곡 해나간다는 거에 대해서 매우 깊은 의미를 받았고요. 화성시도 그런 부분을 우리 인권도시포럼에서 한 단계 한 단계 하지만 저희가 그 인권도시를 선언하겠다 이런 생각은 못했는데 그런 부분을 저희가 조금 더 적극적으로 해야겠다 이런 느낌을 많이 받았습니다.
Thank you, Mayor. And now I will turn to the Regent of Boyo-Negoro and see if what you would like to share of things you may have learned or things that you may also want to share another good example from your particular experience and your region. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, the ambassador. When I'm working in the government, I'm just to Beirut. We have the parliament to control, and we have to a body in the government like the planning area and the excusing in the some people to working in the job. Actually, I have also like the very control from the corruption again in the government. Number two, independent is in the Bojonegoro also controlled by government center. Time to time, I'm report the allocation budget and the implementers in the area. Number three, I'm focusing like the human rights issue in the women's and the children's. It is more may make me focus to handle it and clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll leave the floor to you again, Mayor Helena Stenberg from Piteå.
Thank you. As I said, I think the citizens' dialogue is crucial to be successful in a work to become a human rights city. And that requires that you have a system and a structure for your citizens' dialogue. We have built our systems over several years. And we have different methods for different ages or different people. But I think the structure is very important, because if you have that, you can ask your citizens, of course, about practical issues near to them in their daily life, but also in difficult questions such as corruption, because you have a platform for the dialogue. And that I want to say I think is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to some questions that we've received from the audience. And the first one that I think is very interesting regards gender balance and representation and corruption. To rephrase the question a little bit, and I will start with the mayor of Hwaesong. Do you find that this is do you find that gender balance is an important part of the institutions in order to combat corruption? And do you find also, you spoke a lot about trust, do you find that gender balance and representation from all sectors of society in the institutions of the government and the state, that is in your context, that is an important element of building and gaining and keeping trust in your city?
여기 스웨덴하고 인도네시아 시장님이 계신데 인도네시아랑 스웨덴하고 한국은 특성이 좀 다를 수 있습니다. 그러니까 한국은 30년 전만 해도 이렇게 여성들이 이렇게 사회 참여가 많지 않았습니다. 근데 지금은 대한민국은 대부분의 여성이 사회에 참여를 하고 있습니다. 그런데 기존에는 이러한 부패가 연결되곤 하는 게 대부분 남성에 의해서 이루어졌습니다. 그리고 그거는 사회활동을 대부분 남성이 하고 있었기 때문이고요. 근데 여성 참여들이 많아지면서 남성과 여성하고 좀 다른 부분들이 있습니다. 아무래도 여성분들은 일을 더 섬세하게 하는 성향이 있습니다. 그러니까 섬세하게 함으로써 공무원 사회에서도 부패로 연결될 수 있는 고리가 줄어드는 느낌을 좀 많이 갖고 있습니다. 남성들은 큰 틀의 일은 좀 잘하는 반면에 이 스웨덴하고 인도네시아는 모르겠지만 여성분들은 섬세함을 훨씬 더 잘 처리합니다. 그래서 다양한 화성의 대한민국이 남녀 젠더 비율이 같아진다는 게 저는 부패를 줄이는데 매우 중요한 열쇠가 될 수 있다고 생각합니다.
Thank you for those very inspiring words, and I would be interesting also to hear this perspective from Indonesia on the question of gender balance, representation, and corruption. If your views and experiences in this particular area. Could you hear me? The regent of Bojonegoro?
This is not clearly. Sorry. This is.
I'm sorry, but I'll rephrase. I'll if you can hear me now, I'll rephrase my question. We just heard from the mayor of Hwaesong, who reflected a little bit on the importance of equal representation of men and women in government institutions, and how that can also help efficient delivery of services and to combat corruption. And I wanted to ask you what your experience is when it comes to the effects and the importance of gender equality in the questions that we have just discussed.
Okay. I make sure while working in the government, I must do everything is by rules. Everything is by rule. So much focusing what to item when you have a mission and vision, when to want to build and campaign. Maybe different elected system. In Indonesia, direct election, it is more heavy social responsibility and the candidate. This is one of me to focusing in my program, and must to be working very clearly for my citizen. This is one opinion. So maybe a different system in democracy, Korea, Sweden, and Indonesia. We have three trias politica system, and this is all item which is by controls. Also, the democracy system also a difference. Maybe in Korea is and Sweden and Indonesia. I'm just example in Bojonegoro. We have a direct food. It is much more social responsibility, more heavy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Helena Stenberg from Piteå. Mayor Stenberg, would you like to add anything on these questions? I, of course, read Swedish, and I was very impressed by those posters that you showed. Maybe we can get the embassy's help to translate some of them to Korean, so we can showcase them to a bigger audience. But it'd be interesting to hear some of your reflections on this.
Well, I think gender equality is a human right. So, of course, it's important to address gender equality. In the region of Norrbotten, the region of northern Sweden, we have worked intensive with these questions for a long time also, and have experts who look at the municipalities' work with gender equality. We have projects with all from preschools to elderly care, how we decide that you can get help from the elderly care. And we see that there are differences between how we decide between men and women. So, of course, we have a lot of work to do. I used to say we have to have the gender equality glasses on in every question that we are focusing on. So gender equality is a question that is very near to my heart, and it is a human right.
Very much so. Thank you very much. I will, before I invite Morten Kjærum to reflect on the entirety of our sessions today, I will pose to you one last question that we have received from the audience, and I think one that's a fairly obvious question in a sense, but perhaps not that easy to answer. And that is regarding the pandemic. And I will start with you, Mayor of Hwaesong. How has the pandemic affected your work on human rights and against corruption? Has it made things more difficult? Have you had to adapt the ways of working with these questions? And are there any lessons you would like to share on this?
팬데믹으로 가장 인권에서 문제가 됐던 거는 대면을 할 수 없기 때문에 사각지대에 있는 분들에 대해서 많이 만날 수가 없었습니다. 행정에서 그 분야라는 사람들이 많은데 그분들을 만날 수 없음으로 인해서 문제들이 야기되고, 또한 인권적으로 어려운 사람, 경제적으로 어려운 사람들에 대해서는 저희가 자꾸 상담을 하고 그분들이 조금 더 어떻게 하면 시혜 혜택을 받을 수 있을까, 이런 문제가 있는데 그 부분이 좀 많이 어려웠고요. 반대는 지난번에 시민들의 의견 듣는데 지역회의 같은 걸 통해서 대면으로 많이 했는데, 팬데믹으로 해서 저희가 지금 줌회의를 통해서 이 웨비나를 통해서 진행하듯이 저희가 온라인 정책자문단을 3만 명을 만들 수 있었던 계기도 이 팬데믹으로 인해서 이런 온라인 쪽으로 넘어갔기 때문에, 예전엔 의견을 들으면 100명, 200명 요 정도의 의견을 듣다가 3만 명의 의견을 들을 수 있는 이런 시스템이 만들어질 수 있다 해가지고 장점과 단점이 인권 차원에서는 공존했던 것 같습니다.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And I think this is something all of us grapple with. And the question is still out there. How will this pandemic affect not only our work, but what we do in the longer run? I will turn to you, Anna Moana, Regent of Bojonegoro. How has the pandemic played out in your city? Has it made the work against corruption and for human rights more difficult? Has it made your methods of working different during the pandemic?
Okay. Pandemic COVID-19 is one of the issues, and the good governance is one of issues. This is when I'm working in the government, I must do by rules, and the handle in the COVID-19 is must to minimize victim. So no impact from the 19 COVID. Is many children lose parents. So I'm analysis and to support the budget to handle it. Also, government center has to policy to mass refocusing budget to handling COVID. Also, I must to support the many poor people day to day to give them food, everything. But I'm worried about the impact. COVID is much to more criminals, but I must to work together with police and with the police and other NGOs to support them handle in the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last word on this question will go to Mayor Helena Stenberg. What are your reflections, and are there perhaps even some lessons from the way you've worked during the pandemic that we can take with us in our work forward regarding human rights and also the fight against corruption?
Well, due to the citizen dialogue, I agree with the Mayor of Varsong. We have learned a lot, and we have made opportunities to the citizens to meet us in a different and new way with the Zoom, for example. But I also think that the pandemic has showed us cracks within the human rights for our inhabitants and citizens, like domestic violence, for example, or loneliness amongst our elderly, and those cracks in our systems. I think it's good because we now see them and can do something about it. So I hope that those both gender equality but also human rights glasses are on now, because we know that there are cracks, and if we see them, we can do something about them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. And this is, of course, a big, maybe in a sense, a separate topic that now that we've met and we know each other, that we may want to return to in another session. There are obviously also issues that one reads about regarding how the methods to combat the pandemic, which have been very different in very different parts of the world, whether that has also pushed the boundaries a little bit about on human rights, on surveillance, and so on and so forth. So these are very topical and very interesting questions. But now I will leave the floor to Morten Kjærrum, both for your reflections and also the task to maybe summarize a little bit and draw some conclusions of what we've heard over the past almost 2 hours now. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thanks to all the panelists for excellent and very inspiring presentations. And I think just to make the bridge from your last question to my winding up, I would say that I think the COVID crisis has been a gigantic amplifier of a lot of the challenges in our society. It has been a magnifier in the sense that we have seen, as you rightly said, Helena, seen a lot of the inequalities in our society clearer. I mean, one thing in most societies, from the global north to the global south, we can just take the list of the death tolls. I think that those lists, who died, during the COVID crisis tell us all about the inequalities in our societies in relation to economic inequality, racism, ethnicity, gender issues, ageism, so the elderly, persons with disabilities, etc. So I think there's a very big, let's say, a long list that human rights cities can embark upon. But it's that sort of, let's say, transparency that we have also in the more narrow scope of the corruption that we have addressed today, have seen, for example, most recently in the leak of the Pandora papers. That's sort of a different way of creating transparency, but it also creates a transparency and tell us a story that this is a global issue that can only be addressed in a global dialogue, as the one that we have had here these 2 hours. Issues in the global south, issues in the global north, and we need to see how we can address it together. Another element in this that has also come across in the conversation is sort of the multiple approaches. We had Martin, the economist. We're very pleased that the Office of the High Commissioner and the Raoul Wallenberg Institute now have joined into this very big project with 5 rights economists that we are working with in order to, again, penetrate these issues in a more profound manner than we have been able to hitherto, you could say, primarily with our legal toolbox. But we also need many other toolboxes that have been addressed here. I mean, for example, again, coming back to the COVID, we have seen corruption in the health sector. So where are the doctors? Where are the medical faculties? And here I can say I'm very pleased that we are actually increasingly engaging with medical faculties, both in terms of them taking on board not only human rights, but also the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, with that also the corruption. I think it has been an eye-opener for many people, both in the global north and south, of the level of corruption, access to the protection masks in the early days, oxygen. People could not get that because of the corruption in the system. And of course, now we have the whole terrible situation with the global vaccination rollout, which again tell us that there is something that should have been a global public good or a human right to health, right to life, suddenly was caught up in, let's say, classical economic structures, including corruption. So this is where we are very pleased that we are, so they have the economists on board, now increasingly getting the health professionals, and also what was raised earlier on the technology. How can they, that was one of the questions, how technology, can it help? Will it, or is it deepening corruption? And of course, the reply is neither. It's both good and bad. But again, I'm very pleased that more and more engineers are working from a human rights-based approach to see how can they, in algorithms, in artificial intelligence, build human rights in what we call human rights by design. So it's actually in the structure from the very beginning. And here I have to say I'm very pleased that the European Union is taking a firm leadership in the human rights-based approach to new technology. And I know also the country like Korea is very much on the same line in your technological developments. So this is one of the places, and again, having the corruption component in there as part of the human rights is crucial. Then where do we turn to? Where are we? And here we have to say that the human rights world is still it's still early days for bringing that connection that we have done here of human rights and corruption. One of the big advantages is that what the human rights world can do, as reflecting what Helena said in her opening remarks, is that it can make, I mean, what we often call the victimless crime, corruption being the victimless crime. If you take Helena talked about her gender glasses. If we take our human rights glasses on, you see all the victims. You see those who cannot get a fair trial. You see those children who cannot get access, right to education, right to health that we have talked about, and all the other. And it just jumps on you. And that that development, global development, we have seen very much with the outset in the cities in the past 5, 6, 7 years. And we see that mobilizing factor from bottom up, that people suddenly recognize that it's not only because I live in a poor country that I cannot get access to health or education, but it's actually because there's some people who rob the country or my society for those means that actually should be allocated exactly to health and education, just to mention those. So that whole visibility, which is such a powerful, or is I would almost say a precondition for things to change. And here the UN has played a crucial role. A few years ago, the Office of the High Commissioner made it a frontline issue, sort of what some of us would call a greenhouse, an area that they would develop. And we have worked very closely with the Office of the High Commissioner, conducted a number of roundtables in Latin America and Southern Africa and elsewhere on this issue, and we can see that things are happening. It also has a flow, let's say, an impact on the UN mechanisms in wider sense, so they pick it up to a larger extent today than before. And again, as Charles said, this is key in relation to the national human rights institutions, and further down to the many ombuds institutions, other institutions that we see, and accountability mechanisms at local level in the municipalities, in the regions as well. And we see that these, with cities becoming human rights cities as Lund, where the Raoul Wallenberg Institute is situated, as well as Piteå and many other cities across continents, that with becoming a human rights city, the accountability mechanisms are also being strengthened and contribute to create that the necessary transparency and accountability, which is key. My last point here would be that pick up on what I think all of you have mentioned, namely the issue of trust. That trust is such a strong parameter, indicator for where we are on human rights, where we are in relation to corruption, and of course other issues as well. It's interesting to see when we see countries becoming more and more illiberal, authoritarian, which unfortunately we have seen in Europe. We also see the index on corruption is growing. So I think it is well established in research that there is a correlation between, let's say, the democratic, transparent, human rights-based society and low level of corruption, as the ambassador said in his opening remarks. And then to the contrary, the more illiberal a country is, the higher risk there is for corruption as well as the lower trust level. So trust, all these elements are intimately linked and needs to be worked on much more. And here, of course, the engagement, the duty to engage for societies. There's a fundamental right to participate, and the flip side for the authorities is, of course, the engagement, the duty to engage the citizen. And I was very pleased with the sort of the structured dialogue that we heard about, and the steps and also the lessons learned from the COVID crisis that we have learned. And I was very intrigued by what was said about the gender, which can sort of block in a way, or be an, let's say, a buffer against corruption, as was said. I would add here one element that we haven't really had time to discuss, and that is the youth. We had yesterday the launch of set of recommendations from a big youth forum that we have convened over some months, and this in Southeast Asia or in different parts of Asia. And they came together, again, facilitated by, I would say, by COVID, by having the online possibilities. So they worked very closely and made an extremely interesting set of recommendations for how youth can engage in some of the crises, the post-pandemic, the climate crisis, and other crises. And one of the things that came up in these discussions is that what we see here, that was actually the special rapporteur on the right to poverty in a previous panel. He said that what we see with the youngsters is that they are moved from activism to innovation. So basically that they're of course still activists as youngsters, I think should be, but they're also becoming more and more innovative. So they actually contribute to find solution and not only criticize. And let's not forget that a young mind is often more creative than the older minds that many of us here have up here. So really bring them on board, engage them more. That is both to get their ideas, harvest their ideas, and again, make them alert to the issues like corruption, but also to build trust for the future with the youngsters. And I actually think that maybe next year's panel should have that as a focus, the gender and the youngsters. So, and see how the structured dialogues can be developed further. It's an issue, the whole issue of how to actually engage people, how to create these dialogues is something that has emerged as a question in several of the panels that we have had during this World Human Rights City Forum. So with that, I once again want to, I think time is up. I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to contribute to this ongoing discussion and ongoing challenge. But hopefully by this we can contribute a little bit to move it forward. So once again, thanks, and over to you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you so much for those concluding words, and very well noted also this suggestion on youth and gender. Just like you, I feel that bringing in more young minds, I think will be inspiring to the youth. I think will be very inspiring to us here as well, certainly to me. And this actually concludes now our session on human rights, corruption and trust in a new social contract. I'd like again to thank all our speakers, our audience, of course, the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, and of course the Secretariat of the World Human Rights Cities Forum in Gwangju. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you today, and I have learned an immense a lot from your interventions and from the discussion. And I hope that is true for all of our participants. So many thanks again for sharing both challenges, but even more so your best practices. And keep up the good work. Thank you so much for your presence here today and your interventions. Thank you.